So if you don't want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on this 3-month emergency spending that's 1,500 pages that no one had the time to read, well, then you're against kids' cancer research. I'm going to give the layman's version of what a CR is. Basically, what happens is, instead of passing a budget as you would expect Congress that controls the purse strings to do, what they do is they pass these massive omnibus bills that are like thousands upon thousands of pages that sort of fund everything instead of funding like line items or, single issues or single department budgets. They just do these whole big things. And what happens is these are just laden with pork. Pork, if you're completely new to politics or anything, is just the term they use for pet projects that benefit individuals. And so let's say I'm congressman here in Clarion County and I'm against this massive spending bill and I run on the promise of we're going to cut down Washington spending. And so they come to me and they say, Rob, we really need your vote in this. So here's what we'll do. We'll give $10 million for a new post office to be built in your district, and it'll employ 30 people. Or, oh, there's an airport there. We'll put $50 million into the airport there, and that'll create 70 jobs. And then you could go back, because you're trying to win your election back home, and you could say, look, I brought in these jobs. I brought in this investment. Or there's other sorts of pet projects that you could want, but you get the idea. That's what happens. Oftentimes then what happens is Congress doesn't meet their obligations to passing these on time. And so you end up at the end of the year where there hasn't been a budget passed, and then you have to have like an emergency or a continuing resolution. And so basically it's, well, we need a stopgap to fund the government, because if we don't fund it in the next 3 days, well, then the government's going to shut down. When the government shuts down, it's not that big of a deal. And for example, when it happened in 2018, 2019, probably the only thing that the average person would have noticed is that like your national parks closed. That's about it. The idea that employees don't get paid, that's true if you're a federal employee that can't work because the government shut down, but you get back pay once you go back to work, once the budget passes. So you basically get a vacation. Now, it would suck over the end of the year if you were expecting to get paid next week and you don't, but that's in general what happens. But that threat is always used. Oh, there's going to be a government shutdown, so we have to do this to avoid the shutdown. Now, what I told this caller is, this is the game as it's played by the Democrats. First, I'll say this. It is not really a Democrat versus Republican issue. It is an establishment versus people seen as outside the establishment issue. Because the truth is, the old guard Republicans are incredibly happy with this system. They're happy with shaking their fist at the sky and saying, we spend too much money, and then doing nothing about it. And then still voting for these bills. There's a handful in the Republican Party that usually don't, but there's almost always enough. And so that's what happened. They always say, well, we regret we have to do it, but we can't have the government shut down. We can't. But really, they don't care. They're okay with this. They're okay with the massive pork projects, etc. But as the game's played, because currently the establishment, the party that is the forefront of the establishment is the Democratic Party, they're able to control the narrative. And so the narrative is, no matter what the situation, it's always Republicans that are responsible for the shutdown. Always. It doesn't matter. If it's a Democratic president and Republican House and Senate, it's Republicans' fault. If it's a Democratic president and Democrat House and Senate, it's still Republicans' fault. If it's a Republican president and you have a Republican House but a Democratic Senate, it's Republicans' fault. It doesn't matter. The situation right now is we currently have a Democratic president, a Republican House, and the Democrats control the Senate with the tie-breaking vote. Or, I'm sorry, that's what the situation we had previously. Now, we have a Democrat president, Republicans control the House and the Senate. The shutdown that occurred in 2018 to 2019, this was the longest shutdown in government history, modern government history at least, for the United States. And this was blamed on Republicans. Now, this is what happened then. It is true that Donald Trump had a television conference with Chuck Schumer and was like, I'll take credit for the shutdown. Yeah, I don't care. Trump says a bunch of stuff. He's always blustering, whatever. Trump's trying to get his agenda passed. The reason the government shut down in 2018 going into 2019 was because Democrats refused to allow $5 billion for the wall. They said walls were racist, walls didn't work. Now, this is the same Democrats that will spend trillions upon trillions of dollars, but they couldn't spare $5 billion for the wall. Now, of course, the candidate for Democrat, Kamala Harris, said she actually wanted to fund a wall, but $5 billion was too much to ask. And so Democrats were staunch, we're not funding it. Now, the truth is, anytime there's a shutdown, you could reasonably blame both parties, because inevitably the reason that there's going to be a shutdown is the parties can't agree on what they want in a budget to pass it. And so you could say, well, if the other party just agreed, then there wouldn't be a shutdown. So I blame them. And so people that want to say, well, Trump's responsible for the shutdown, they're not necessarily wrong. If Trump would have just acquiesced to, and Trump and the Republicans would have acquiesced to everything the Democrats wanted, sure, it would have averted a shutdown. That's true. But the same is true of the other side. If the Democrats were okay with $5 billion going to the wall, then the country wouldn't have shut down. The government wouldn't have shut down. But Pondering's quick to be like, how could you blame Democrats? How could you say it was Democrats? The reason I can say that I blame the Democrats is because the Democrats said, we prioritize not spending $5 billion for the wall, and so we're willing to shut down the government over it. That's it. That was the entire debate. Democrats said, nope, we won't give that $5 billion, shut down the government. Now, from the perspective of someone who's more fiscally conservative like me, I don't so much mind the idea of saying, we want to say if there are things that we think are too expensive or things that we think we shouldn't be funding, then we say, no, we're not going to sign a bill with those things in it. That's not who the Democrats are, make no mistake. They wanted the open borders. They didn't want border security, which is why we then saw the crisis, what happened when they took over, when they won in 2021. But the principle of we're willing to shut down the government if it means we don't fund things we don't want to fund, that's fine in principle, but not to the Democrats. The Democrats say, no, that means you're a heartless bastard. You want government employees to go without paychecks. That's what they say. And so that's blamed on the Republicans. It's always blamed on the Republicans. No one said, for example, the previous shutdown, Jimmy Kimmel went on national television, was crying, kids won't get insurance, kids won't get health care, kids won't get food. And he cried these crocodile tears just because Republicans won't give in and sign these things and pass this budget. Where were those crocodile tears when the Democrats refused to give in and just give an extra $5 billion out of a massive bill and they wouldn't spend $5 billion on the wall? Where were the crocodile tears? Oh no, it was still Republicans' fault. And that's what happens when you control most of the mainstream media and control most of the levers of information. You control the narrative, and so it's always, oh, it's Republicans' fault. And the establishment Republicans love this, by the way, because they use that as an excuse. They go, well, even though myself personally, I wouldn't sign this budget, but politically it'll hurt us because the Democrats will blame us for shutting down the government. So now, even though you have a Republican-controlled House and Republican-controlled Senate, the argument we're told is, well, but still, we have to pass this stuff or we'll get blamed for a shutdown. So we have to go ahead and pass it. That's what McJohnson's saying. But they want to be able to say that because the truth is they want the massive spending bill. They like the pork. They don't want single issue bills. That's what's going on. So Pondering saying, oh, here's Trump. Here's Trump saying that he'll take responsibility for the shutdown. Yeah, I don't really give a shit what Trump said. Trump can take responsibility for the shutdown. That's fine. Trump certainly has some blame about that shutdown. But the number one reason that shutdown occurred was Democrats said, we ain't giving $5 billion for the wall. They threatened to filibuster, which would have meant that Republicans wouldn't have had enough votes because they'd need 60 votes. That means they couldn't do it. It doesn't matter what Trump said, I'll take responsibility. Yeah, Trump's responsible in the sense he said, nope, I'm not going to cut the border funding out. Nope, sorry. But Democrats are responsible for saying, we're going to filibuster if we have to fund the wall. No, we won't do it. That's what happened. So that's the big victory that Pondering had. Oh, it was Trump's fault. It was Trump's fault. I personally don't care. Have you ever heard me gnash my teeth and scream about government shutdowns? You have not. But people like Pondering do. So why weren't they blaming Democrats? Just give in. Give the $5 billion for the wall. Just give in. Do you think that was what Pondering said? Of course not. Walls are racist. Walls are evil. Walls are ineffective. Remember the absurdity? The Democrats were trying to claim like we're fiscally responsible. We got to be careful where we spend our money. We can't afford $5 billion on a wall, says the people that are spending hundreds of millions sending critical race studies and gender studies to Afghanistan and every other pet project that you could ever imagine. But couldn't spend money on border security, couldn't do that. So that's the first issue. Then the second issue came where the caller asked about this cancer funding. So if you missed it, what happened was you had Mike Johnson, the Republican Speaker of the House, basically crafted this monstrosity 1,500 and change bill that was disgusting. Trump and Elon put pressure on social media to be like, why would we sign this? This is garbage. Trump and Republicans come into power in January 20th. So why would you sign this? And it had all kinds of other stuff into it. We're not going to get into it right now, but it was a bad bill. None of the bills, the one that got passed here eventually sucks too. None of them are good. But it's 1,500 something pages. So it fails. Enough Republicans are worried that their constituents now, because there's a social media platform where people can speak the truth, they're going to be like, why is my congressman voting for this garbage? And they don't have to rely just on the talking heads at Fox News anymore. So Republicans are like, oh, okay, let's renegotiate this. And they cut it down to like 100 pages, but it's still spent near the same, or I don't know. Trump wanted to raise the debt ceiling. I think that's bad. We can talk about that later if people want. Anyways, second bill fails as well. Then the third bill, it ends up passing. Then you had Mike Johnson came out and said, we're going to do single issue vote. So we'll do fund government jobs, fund the National Park Service. Each of those will be their own bill. And then we'll give an up and down vote on each of those, which is good. That's what should be happening. But then he worked with Democrats and got a bill passed that Democrats unanimously voted for in the House. Do you think that's a good bill? If all the Democrats agreed to vote for it, what do you think? You think that helps Trump and the Republicans? Anyways, I digress. In that first draft was monies to fund a particular organization through cancer research. And so the caller asked me what was going on, and I said, well, this is a game the Democrats constantly play. They'll fund everything. There's nothing they won't fund if they think it could remotely benefit themselves. Some of the funding can do good. Cancer research funding can do well, right? But it doesn't matter. Sure, yeah, $100 million, whatever, $200 million, sure, why not? They don't care. Same's true of the establishment Republican types. They don't care. They don't care. No one's sitting there going, whoa, is this in the budget? They don't care. It's fake money to them. Just print it. We don't care. And so then you put all that stuff in, then there's a bunch of other garbage that your opposition won't like. And they're like, well, are you going to vote against kids' cancer funding? Now, so you see the game there. So if you don't want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on this 3-month emergency spending that's 1,500 pages that no one had the time to read, well, then you're against kids' cancer research. You see the game? They're very good at doing this semantic stuff. Oh, you're against Antifa? Well, Antifa's anti-fascist. That must mean you're a fascist. You see? Brief sidestep to talk about, should your tax dollars be going to cancer research funding? Well, you could take the uber libertarian approach, which would say no, because taxation's theft. But let's go beyond that. I personally wouldn't care if $200 million is going to cancer research for children, if that money is being spent wisely. I don't know if this money is being spent wisely. I don't know. The problem is, so many people just take at face value what something says. And this is particularly true of the Democrats, but Republicans do this as well. So, for example, if you go back to the debate that I had with people like, I don't think Pondering was there, Hutch was there, Pisco was there, it was a panel debate I did on Dylan Burns' show, going into the election. They didn't want to talk about the actual issues of things like the economy, etc. But the one talking point they had was, well, Kamala wants to spend all this money to build houses. Isn't that good? Spend money, build houses. Or Biden's massive infrastructure bill. That's good. Infrastructure's good. We should spend money on infrastructure. But the problem is, how is that money spent? If I were to say to you, hey, everyone, I need you all to donate $1,000 to me so that I could lose weight, you would say, wow, losing weight, that's good. That'll be healthy. But then I took that money and just bought a bunch of, speed, snorting drugs every night. Yeah, I might lose some weight. But if you don't send me that $1,000, then you're against people trying to get fit, right? You see the stupidity of it? This isn't just in the abstract. How much money was spent on EV charging stations? by the Harris-Biden administration. Remember the Obama administration giving money to fund green research for that company Solyndra that got hundreds of millions of dollars and then walked away doing nothing? Remember that? So the idea that we're just told, oh, well, you have to sign off on this $200 million or this $100 million, it's for cancer research, unless you're a monster. And that's how they're trying to paint Rand Paul, because Rand Paul's like, his big objection to this was, well, is this funding also, is it mirror funding elsewhere? Is there other funding going to this? So just in general. Now, I don't know. This particular money to this particular organization might be incredibly well spent. It may be. I don't know, but I'm just saying in general. Anyone who people are bullshitting you that are like, oh yeah, this money, it's just going to cancer research, so you hate cancer research if you're against it. Maybe it's going back to some shady organization where let me give you an example that's even easier to understand. There's a ton of charities out there that the cause sounds great. But then you find out that like only 3 cents to the dollar you send to them actually goes to their stated mission. And the rest is going to administrative cost. And then you have some, the person who's heading the foundation's making hundreds of millions a year or something like that. But if you don't give to them, then you hate puppies or whatever they're... Again, I'm not saying that about this particular organization. I'm just saying that's the stupidity of it. Now, the same is true on the other side. If you say, well, if Democrats don't want to fund their border wall, they're clearly against border security. Not necessarily. They could say, we think the way that this funding going is nonsensical. It'll be a waste of money. The problem is Democrats can't really make the waste of money argument because they'll spend money on anything. But in general, those that are being legitimate, that are like, look, I'm not convinced with specifically where this money is going to be spent, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I might disagree with them. I might think they're hypocritical. But in theory, either party saying, listen, just because you say this money is going to X doesn't mean I'm against X. If I say, no, I'm not voting for that. I could think that that money could be spent better elsewhere, or that we're spending too much, or I have questions as to how effective that money will be, etc. But this is the game that you see played, particularly on the Democratic side. So the narrative went out there. You had all these Democrats saying, because Republicans rejected that first CR bill, and then they pared down 1,500 pages to like 100 pages, and that cancer research line wasn't in there. Clearly, they're against cancer research. That was the narrative. You saw this from all sorts of talking heads on television. You saw this from Democrats, etc. And so I saw some of the left-wing commentators that I interact with on this channel and on X sometimes were commenting about this. My initial reaction was, as I've told you, look, just because they're not spending, this is just a rhetorical trick to say, oh, we have 1 million things that we put in this bill, and if you reject, instead of giving an up and down vote on each thing, you either have to accept it all or accept none of it. And if you don't accept it all, that means you hate cancer research. That's stupidity. But what made this unique example even funnier was, it turns out, Republicans in the Republican-controlled House in March of 2014 overwhelmingly voted to fund this cancer research center for kids. That bill passed overwhelmingly in the Republican-controlled House and then went to the Senate, where, surprise, surprise, the head of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, refused to put it up for a vote. In other words, we're supposed to believe that Democrats and their voters are like, my God, you'd be a monster not to immediately support this cancer research. You'd be a monster. Republicans in March were like, in the House were like, yeah, okay. Democrats are like, because you voted against this massive 1,500-page bill, that proves the Republicans in the House are monsters. They don't care about kids getting cancer. But they did. They funded it in March. They sent it to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer said, I'm good. I'm not going to put it up for a vote. That's what happened. So it was the Democrats that made sure that this wasn't voted upon. And so once this story breaks, where are all these lefties? Where are they? Where are all the Democrats that were saying, oh, Republicans hate kids' cancer research? Of course, then what happened was it last night or the night before, the Senate went ahead and put through the standalone bill, and it passed overwhelmingly. So it's been funded. Thank God they said, about time, these Republicans. Republicans? It would have always passed. It was Schumer and the Democrats that held the bill up. Why did they hold the bill up? Can anyone tell me why they would hold it up? Now I'll tell you what the spin is, but why do you think they would hold this bill up? seemed to be massively popular with Republicans and Democrats in the House, would have been massively popular with Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, would have passed overwhelmingly. So why not bring it up for a vote? Why wouldn't they? Does anyone have a guess? That's right. Lewis gets it. To use his leverage for something else. To use his leverage for the massive spending bill. Everyone thinks this is a good idea. We'll hold it up and then put it in the spending bill. And then if Republicans don't vote for the spending bill with all this other stuff that we want in it, well, then that proves you don't care about kids with cancer. It's leverage. Now that's fine from a gamesmanship theory. But if you're going to get on your high horse and say, this proves that our opposition doesn't care about kids with cancer, it's farcical when your side is the side that held up the vote in the first place.